Well, first off, thank you all so much for being here. I'm a bit of a presentation type guy, so I want to keep things dark in here so the presentation really shines. Before I start, I want to really give some thank yous. First off, a thank you to the honors program, because this has been by far the best part of PUC for me. It has stretched me, it has pushed me, and it has made me into a new person, so thank you. Second off, I have to do this to my parents. For everything you've done, I appreciate it. Anyway, without further ado, yeah, I know, a little less eloquent. Without further ado, let's dive in. Imagine for a moment the year that you graduated from high school. As you looked at the myriad potential paths your life could take, you were overwhelmed by the decisions that you had to make. Now imagine this, and this might be harder for some of you than it is for others, that you wanted to become an aviator, a pilot. So you decided to take this seemingly impossible step. You decided to take a chance, to follow your dreams, to live with your head in the clouds. As you did more research, you found that there were 4 separate ways of obtaining your various pilot's licenses. By far the most common of these routes was to contract with an individual instructor for private training, but you could also attend a Part 61 or Part 141 flight school. Part 61 offered a lot of flexibility, but Part 141 was very structured and allowed you to complete your license in more time, saving you money. A third option was to go to ATP flight school, which is the aviation industry's version of a trade school. By going to a school such as this, you might be able to cut your time down to the terms of days and weeks rather than months and years like you might find at another flight school. That said, you knew, because you were a prudent student, that going through training so quickly could be detrimental to your overall skill level. And so you chose to pursue the best possible option for a career pilot. You wanted to go to a collegiate aviation program. And there were some big benefits to a collegiate aviation program, because if you're going to go for the airlines, you need a college degree. Otherwise, you have no chance of advancement. Collegiate aviation programs have a huge advantage over other forms of flight training for anyone who wants to go into the airline industry. Unfortunately, while it would seem that collegiate aviation would be booming in light of the looming pilot shortage, this is not the case. Many collegiate aviation programs are plagued by low enrollment, low retention, and overall poor quality of equipment, instruction, and standards. That said, these woes are not necessarily limited to collegiate aviation, as you'll find about an 80% attrition rate in all of flight students. That means that students who begin training for their private pilot license, 80% of them drop out before they finish. Now, using the aviation program here at PUC as a case study, we can see an overall downward trend in the aviation program enrollment over the last 11 years. Now, what I want you to do is focus in on years 2 and 7. Notice each of these years has a total of 23. Let's see if I can aim this thing. And 21 plus 2, 23 total for year 7. Each of these is the highest enrollment of the given last 11 consecutive years. Now, one would expect that approximately 1/4 of those students would graduate in those given years, perhaps oversimplified a bit. But let's see what the actual graduation rates were for those specific years. Keep your eyes on 2 and 7. A grand total of 1 graduate for both of those years. Out of 46 students, 1 graduated. Now, granted, again, oversimplified method, but it shows that there's a high rate of attrition. As you can see from this graph, we have graphed the theoretical number of students who should be graduating each year from the aviation program with the actual number of graduates who have completed the aviation program. Notice again, high rates of attrition. Simplified method, we could go in and actually dive into the data, because after all, students do leave colleges in general, not just aviation programs. But this does show that something is up, something is wrong. So we have to ask ourselves, why such poor performance? Many argue that low enrollment and retention is due to high student costs. I've heard over and over again in my research, students aren't coming to PUC because flight training is too expensive. I'm out here to beg that this is not the case. I'm not convinced. After all, flight training at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which is the leading aviation university in the United States, costs approximately, guess how much? $80,000 per year. $80,000. Go to PUC and do aviation, you'll spend about $45,000 a year, including flight training. Embry-Riddle is twice as expensive, and they're turning away 30% of their students. Guess how many we turn away? 6%. Anyway, because of this, I decided to dive a little deeper. Not all aviation programs are suffering. Walla Walla University's aviation program is actually growing incredibly in terms of enrollment. Let's move on and look at yet another metric here, the number of flight instructors employed. Now, flight instructors are certified by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and can be comprised of faculty or even upper division students like myself. And while I was unable to obtain data from PUC despite 5 separate requests, I know from personal experience that the number of flight instructors employed by PUC has decreased over the same period. So why in the world is Walla Walla growing while PUC is in atrophy? The reason is not cost. This graph shows the hourly price of each program's basic training aircraft. Notice here that PUC's aircraft prices have remained stagnant and relatively low over the last consecutive 7 years. Walla Walla's program, however, has increased their already high prices comparatively twice over the last 7 years, and yet their program is still growing. In fact, this graph shows all of the different aircraft utilized at Walla Walla University and shows that the prices are increasing all across the board, not just for their basic training aircraft. So, why is it that this is happening? I submit that the disparity of performance is due to a disparity of quality. Students expect high things, but they are disappointed by PUC's aviation program. In some cases, student safety is even jeopardized. There have been three partial engine failures in PUC aircraft in the last 2 months. I was flying on one of them. I had to make an emergency landing at the Napa County Airport. This is not safe. It is unacceptable. Students expect quality. What they get instead is nothing short of astonishing. Both of these aircraft are basic trainers. One is from the Napa Jet Center, which is a local Part 61 flight school in the Napa Valley. The other is from PUC's Collegiate Aviation program. Pretend for a moment you're an optometrist. A or B, which would you choose? My dad's an optometrist, I had to. Anyway, as you can see, there is even duct tape holding PUC aircraft together. The interior of a trainer at the Napa Jet Center is clean and crisp. The interior of a PUC aircraft is dirty, grimy, and quite literally falling apart. Students expect to see this when they walk out to complete their flight training, but at PUC, what they see instead is oil stains, cracked paint, bugs in all of the windows, and by the way, I took all these pictures myself, and a dirty exterior in general. So by now, I'm sure you can guess how I feel about the aviation department. I think improvements are needed. That said, I wanted more actionable data, so I went to students at PUC and surveyed them. There were a total of 8 respondents, which granted sounds like a really small amount, but that's about half the program. So it's about a 50% response rate, but taking into account that I only surveyed, for the most part, the upperclassmen. Notice there was a sophomore and a graduate in there as well, but mostly upperclassmen. I actually got almost, I would say, 90% response rates on the surveys that I handed out to the upperclassmen. Anyway, they were given 50 questions, with students asked to rate certain statements on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. After performing statistical analysis on the data, I found that PUC students rated the following as poor: curriculum, aviation facilities and equipment, and overall satisfaction. On the other hand, faculty and student outcomes were rated as average, so students were like, that's okay, it's decent. And PUC campus as a whole, the overall environment, was measured as excellent. Interesting how the only thing measured as excellent here was PUC as a whole. Some specific examples of the items rated as poor on the survey include advanced offerings, include internships or senior projects. Coursework is academically challenging. Aircraft are well maintained. Notice an extremely low average. Most of the respondents gave a 1 on that for strongly disagree. Aircraft are available to meet student needs. Also, a lot of ones there. Faculty members come to class well prepared. I would recommend this program to a friend. I am satisfied with my experiences here. Something's up. Something's wrong. So, how can changes be made? I argue that in order to begin making changes, we must first consider the coffee bean. Coffee exists in several different forms. To make a cup of coffee, it takes a certain number of beans. To pay for those number of beans, you would pay about 1 or 2 cents to make a cup of coffee. However, buy that same amount in the form of ground up coffee beans at the grocery store, and you'll pay about 5 to 25 cents for the same amount. Go to a diner and get a cup of coffee, you'll end up paying about $1 for it. But go to Starbucks, and all of a sudden you pay $5 for a cup of coffee. How can this be? Are consumers stupid? Why are they paying so much more when they could be paying so much less? No. Coffee beans are a commodity, meaning that they are fungible. One coffee bean is not different from another. You can pull them all together and make a cup of coffee. There's nothing differentiated about them, and so they command the lowest price. Ground coffee, on the other hand, is a good, and it is tangible in nature. Someone has taken the coffee beans and ground them up for you, making it into something more like what you actually want, a cup of coffee. Hence, it commands a slightly higher price. When you get a cup of coffee at a diner, the service of receiving coffee is largely intangible. But that said, you are, again, closer to what you actually want, a cup of coffee. Or is that really what you want? Because you don't go to Starbucks for a cup of coffee, you go for the experience. Starbucks creates an experience. You go for the atmosphere, not the coffee. They make that experience memorable and inherently personal, such that you want to return time and time and time again, even when they misspell your name. So, there are 5 steps to creating an experience. First, you must theme an experience. Then, you must harmonize impressions with positive cues while simultaneously eliminating negative cues. Finally, you should mix in memorabilia while engaging each of the 5 senses. Let's go through each of these steps in greater detail. Creating a themed experience is not a new idea. Companies like Disneyland and the Rainforest Cafe have been doing it for decades. For example, how many here have been to Disneyland? Thank you, I'm very glad to hear that. Do you remember the street sweepers? The people who are walking around sweeping the street? They're not there to keep the place clean. They're there to make you think the place is clean. Their guests, notice, not customers, not clients, their guests are there to have an experience. They've been providing experiences for a long time. They've done a great job. Similar things have happened at the Rainforest Cafe, if any of you have been there. That said, experience design is not limited to these other industries. It also takes place in the flight training industry. For example, Embry-Riddle and the International Airline Training Academy, known as IATA, that's based in Napa, by the way, both use airlines as their theme, and we'll look more at that in a second. And while airlines is a great choice of theme, I'm going to argue there are other possible themes that flight schools can utilize to create value on the frontier of academia. For example, you could have old school flying, kind of like the Barnstormers. You could have a theme based after that. Or soaring over California, kind of like Disney. Or the jet setter, someone dressed up in a nice suit, everyone's really fancy, nice watch, and you have nice quality equipment that you train in. After you've picked a theme, it is important that you harmonize impressions with positive cues. What does this mean? It means that you give your students guesses, or hints rather, as to what the theme is through hints in the physical environment and through worker behavior. In other words, if you have to tell your guests, if you have to tell your students what the theme is, you're doing it wrong. You can't tell them what it is. They have to be able to guess it from the physical environment. Embry-Riddle supports its airline theme by treating students as first officers from the moment that they walk into the building. For example, even the most beginning students are immediately put into flight simulators that have advanced flight management systems, just like you'd find in the airlines on the jets. These students are overwhelmed at first, but they are quickly attuned to the fact that they are future airline pilots. They live within that theme the entire time. In contrast, the Napa Jet Center has chosen wine country as its theme, appropriately, and they have decorated their walls with wine barrels and corks and bottles, or whatever wine stuff. Again, they've made a theme, they've supported it through positive cues. Good job to them. So, let's take our hypothetical soaring over California theme and imagine some positive cues. Perhaps you could have an office with murals decorated in let's say walls decorated with murals of famous California landmarks, like Yosemite or the Golden Gate Bridge. You could have your staff dressed as tour guides with the nice khaki shirts. You could have flight lessons to local points of interest, like the Mormon Tabernacle or the Hindu temple out in the mountains by Santa Rosa. There's a lot of cool stuff nearby that students could see rather than just going to the practice area. Finally, students could provide actual scenic tours for tourists in the area. This could increase revenues for the college while also allowing students to make some money and build experience at the same time. Of course, they'd have to have their commercial license first, but it's doable. After creating positive cues, you must next eliminate anything that detracts from the overall theme. At PUC, this includes broken aircraft, outdated maps, low-quality furniture, spider webs on the ceiling, as you can see in this picture, casually dressed desk workers, and overall poor interactions with the staff in general. After creating a meaningful experience through the use of positive cues and the elimination of negative cues, companies should use physical goods to provide their clients with items of memorabilia in order to remind them of their experiences. Now, PUC currently does this very well, as it provides students with the epaulets, notice, after you pass each check ride. Thank you very much. They actually give you a different bar for each one. It's really kind of cool. 1 for private, 2 for instrument, 3 for commercial, 4 for instructor. So good job. Kudos to PUC on that. There's a prop in the office that actually has signatures on it. Every time you complete your first solo, a student signs that, which is cool. It's getting filled up, so we really need a new one. There's not much more room to sign. But again, kudos to PUC on that. But I believe we could do better. Some possible ideas include selling t-shirts and perhaps these teachers could have witty phrases, or perhaps posting pictures of students on Facebook after they pass their check rides. After doing all of that, we need to engage each of the 5 senses. And while the following is somewhat unrealistic, I grant you, it should serve to stimulate your creativity as you think about how each of the 5 senses can be applied to the flight training environment. For the California Adventure theme, let's imagine for a second, guests could be presented with a citrus scent as they walk into the lobby. They could then be given California-type fruits or vegetables or nuts or whatever the case might be as a snack. Finally, there could be soft, adventurous music playing in the background. You get the idea. And then they could walk to a flight planning room with black walls and darkened lights, but the lights could be made out of runway lights or something cool like that. It gets you in the idea of the theme. Again, unrealistic, but it kind of works. And as far as touch goes, there's a lot of different ideas, but maybe you could take the aircraft seats and make, I don't know, if you had a barnstorming theme, you could use burlap for your seats. Might not be the most comfortable, but who cares? The experience is what matters, and as long as the cues match up with what you want your experience theme to be, it doesn't matter if it's painful or not. It just has to match the cues. I realize, as most of you do, that most of this sounds pretty great, but it's definitely a long-term vision. It's not something we can do right now. First, however, some immediate changes have to be made. In order to guide this process, I have attempted to create a practical approach which can be used here at PUC to improve the program in the short term. But before we dive in, let's talk about broken windows theory. A few decades ago, crime ran rampant in New York City subways. Seems like every day there was a mugging. And police tried everything they could to stop it. But you know what? They couldn't. Until one day they stood at the turnstiles and they caught everyone who tried to sneak by without paying the fare. They cracked down on fare beating, and crime disappeared. Why? Because crime is an epidemic. And much like quality, crime and epidemiology mix together, and it spreads like an idea, like an ideology. If you don't take the little things seriously, this is the main point here, if you don't take the little things seriously, people will assume you can't take care of the big things. So, if the windows are broken, it will be assumed that no one is in charge, and the building is left deserted with no one to care for it. So we must ask ourselves, what are PUC Aviation's broken windows? If we can fix those issues, everything else will follow naturally. The first broken window is quite literally broken. In some of the aircraft, the windows can be broken, are the aircraft. However, it's very costly to fix aircraft, so you'll have to go through a number of phases to fix these aircraft. The most important thing that needs to be done immediately is fix the avionics, because without working avionics, training cannot be completed in those aircraft. For those of you who are unfamiliar, avionics stands for aviation electronics, and it comprises most of the navigational equipment on board the aircraft. Step number 2, fix the interiors of the aircraft, because think about it. Where do students spend most of their time when they're flying? If you fix the insides, people will have a greater perception of quality, and you'll be able to command a higher price, which will make you a greater profit in the long term, which will then help you fix the aviation program as a whole. Finally, when the school has enough money to do so, they need to upgrade to a new fleet of aircraft, preferably Cessna 172s, which have 4 seats rather than the 2 seats that we currently have in our 152s. This will allow for greater revenues through greater utilization, such as through providing scenic tours to tourists, and also allowing students to sit in the back and watch and learn. It makes more value for everybody, and they don't burn much more gas or cost much more in maintenance. Definitely worth the upgrade. The second broken window is the aviation facilities themselves. I want to focus specifically, I suppose, on the office, the classrooms, and the hangar. The first step might be very simple. Clean stuff up. Get the spider webs off the roof. Clean up the bird excrement in the corner of the hangar. By doing that, you can increase the overall value for students. That said, in the long term, I believe that more significant changes will have to be made, which might possibly include the construction of a new building. I know it's a lot to ask. Rather than this, I want to see this. By the way, this is real. This is Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, located in Daytona, Florida. That's their flight planning room. Rather than that, oh, by the way, that's the aviation program right there. Rather than that, I want to see that. Granted, long-term vision. It might be a little unattainable right now, and if that's the case, maybe we have another option. If it seems like too much, perhaps PUC should outsource its training to a local flight school like the International Airline Training Academy, which is based at the Napa County Airport. Students could complete ground classes at PUC and then commute to Napa for training, just like the nursing majors commute for their clinicals. IATA has nice facilities. Look at that. A beautiful fleet of matching aircraft. I mean, seriously. And these aircraft look as beautiful on the outside as they do on the inside. The third broken window at PUC is actually quite easily fixed. Well, easily is a relative term. The curriculum. Classes are not challenging, and these classes often repeat themselves over and over and over again. You can even see it in the names. Electronics and fuel systems, advanced electronics, aircraft systems. These classes repeat the same information again and again and again. We don't need to be sitting in the same class again and again. Instead, let's provide classes like aviation law, or airline operations, or advanced aerodynamics. In addition, students should be required to take upper-level mathematics and science classes, like calculus and physics. These are pilots we're talking about here. We want them to know this stuff. One of the reasons this is very important is that college-educated pilots should be more knowledgeable and more well-rounded in both aviation and non-aviation subjects than their non-college educated peers. We need to hold the standards high. Aviation is a transformation, and a transformation can be defined as a collection of experiences. Some of these experiences are inherently painful, but transformation still holds significant value for students because it creates a change in the individual. I believe that students will live up to the high expectations that are placed upon them, and if they don't, they should not be allowed to continue in the program, just like in the nursing program. Time is short, and I could quite literally talk about this all day. Like Dr. Niergaard mentioned, I recommend that you read my paper. It will be cataloged in the PUC library immediately following graduation and available for reading at any time. Some of the additional topics that I have not had time to cover today, which are in the paper, include how to charge for experiences, how to create a sticky, memorable curriculum, how to take away the pain of high prices for students, how to incorporate internships into collegiate aviation programs, and finally, the value of being selective and actually rejecting some students. That said, the sky is the limit for collegiate aviation. All you have to do is dream if you wish to succeed. So what are you waiting for? Get your head in the clouds.
Turn the light on for you.
Okay, I know some people have to rush out, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Yes, please.
Is there not some sort of standard for the program, for aviation programs in terms of like requirements for degree?
That's a fantastic question. There are two sets of standards. One is given by the FAA in the form of the practical test standards, and that's for all pilot trainees. You have to at least match those things. And when PUC students go for check rides, on their first time, their first try, they pass only 30% of the time. Unfortunate. We don't match the standards. The second set of standards is actually provided by a collegiate institution. I forget the name of it, but there is an accreditation process that you can go through. There's an accrediting body for collegiate aviation, and it actually has been shown in multiple studies to increase value for students in the program. Does that answer your question? Great. Yes?
Did you have any interesting experiences visiting these flight schools?
I had a blast visiting these flight schools. I would go up to them and start asking them questions. I'd sit with them for upwards of 2 hours at a time interviewing the owners, the managers, et cetera, et cetera. And on each case, I was offered a job. Which was quite an honor, but I had to tell them no. Anyway, does that answer your question? Yes, Dr. Neens.
Low-hanging fruit. Tell me, great experience on a budget, like no money. What are some things we can do that
Okay,
are attainable?
if we have no budget, no money to throw into this, first thing, I think we need to get stuff clean. The aircraft, like you saw the oil stains there, that takes no extra money to have the people who are already being paid by PUC go out there, the desk workers, and scrub that off as part of their daily duties. Keeps the airplane clean, and it might be hard for the first couple days, but after that, it's just a little touch-up every day. Number one. Number two, let's see here. I think that the overall way that people act, the way that staff act is important. One of the books I read was called The Experience Economy, and it talked about how work is theater, meaning that when you go to work, someone's watching you. Someone somewhere is watching you, and everything you do is analyzed by them. So therefore, staff in the aviation program need to be excited about aviation. If they can get that excitement going, they're going to be okay with, or students would be okay with slightly lower quality. They'll work together to make the aviation program better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
After this presentation, how would you advise aviation students?
I don't know how honest I can be on that. I think that as an aviation student, you have many options available to you. Having a college degree is important, but honestly, the airlines aren't going to look and see, oh, you had an aviation degree versus you had an English degree or a science degree. They just want you to have a college degree. So if you're serious about flight training, you have two options. Take your training into your own hands, really take charge, read the books, go through and make yourself the pilot you want to be, and you can do that anywhere. Or perhaps complete training elsewhere. Any other questions? Chelsea.
When you were going to these different airports, did you ever discuss with the managers or whoever you were interviewing about the possibility of contracting out?
That's a great question. Yes, I did. They were all very excited about the possibility. Good question. Tara.
So speaking of people going elsewhere, do you know when you were studying Walla Walla versus PUC, if some of the students who left PUC were going to Walla Walla, or do you know what else they were doing?
There aren't many students going to Walla Walla, although I can think of one who can't. No. Yeah, one who came from Walla Walla to here. There's problems wherever you go. You can't go to any place and say, this is the perfect collegiate institution for aviation, because up there the weather tends to be poor and you don't have as many flyable days. Here in the Napa Valley, we have a lot of flyable days. It's beautiful weather, good place to learn to fly, and gorgeous scenery too. Dan?
So first of all, I've had the pleasure of flying with Brian. He's been a huge help in aiding my flight training. I'm going for my commercial. And my question to you, because I don't think we've really had this conversation, did you ever hit a point in your training where you were ready to give up?
No. I had a few days in instrument training, and for the pilots out there, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who are not pilots, instrument training is when you put on a little hood and you fly and you go practice landing and all that stuff without looking outside the plane. You just have to do everything by looking at the gauges. It's hard. It's really hard. And so I would have days where I would get back and be almost in tears after those flight lessons. But you get to a point where you just kind of push beyond it. I don't know. And please, go ahead. No, it's okay. I could just ramble forever, remember?
She said, she had jet lag, she just got back from swimming.
Oh, well, I'm glad you came.
Don't believe anything I say. Okay, so I have lots and lots and lots of questions, but I'll just ask this one.
Okay.
Did you, and I assume that you didn't really look at numbers in terms of, let's say one did a strategic plan and said, over the next 10 years, here's how we're going to get to, not, not total Disneyland.
Of course.
And everything, but really a big improvement.
Yeah.
Right? And do most of the things, and really get somewhere. We can see that would be very expensive.
Yes.
You didn't even talk about the expense of what the runway needs right now.
That's correct. The expenses are incredibly high.
Yeah.
To resurface the runway would be in excess of $1 million, I believe closer to $2 million.
Exactly, and yet, if you want to have it look like a beautiful place to come, the runway looks terrible.
Well, the runway I'm not concerned about, to be as a pilot. The runway I'm not. The tarmac I am. The tarmac is falling apart, like you mentioned. The runway's decent. In fact, I don't think it needs lengthening. I don't think it even needs widening. It's fine. But, sorry.
Anyway, it would take a lot of money.
Yes.
So my question is, did you look at numbers to say, okay, in order to pay for that, we would need X number of students with a certain retention rate and perhaps at certain charges for the airplanes and all that stuff? Because we can't even think about embarking
Of course.
on something without something.
No, that makes complete and total sense. When I was starting my project research, I went to finances and I went to our airport administration, et cetera, asked them for numbers and stuff like that I could use in this. And over again, I was told those numbers just don't exist. So I was unable to achieve any numerical data because I could not find a starting basis for it. That said, I'd be more than happy to chat sometime about possibilities.
Talia, and then we go.
Yeah, okay.
Did you complete your entire program here at PUC?
No, I did
Can
one.
you talk a little bit about your experience?
Okay, I'll make it fast, I promise. I went the most common route. I did training with an individual instructor who, by the way, I had to call and ask to accept me, which was a great experience design principle. The fact that he was selective made it seem like he was of a higher value. But he was terrible at ground training, so I had to teach myself everything. I read the books. I actually ended up teaching him how to do spins. Minor details. Yeah, I had a great experience with him because he allowed me to work at my own pace, and I had a fantastic time. I still look up to him with the highest respect. I did do some training here at PUC, and when I did not have fun with it. I was taken advantage of, and they tried to take my money extra more than I needed to. As a flight instructor, I know how much is necessary to obtain a license. I knew that I was ready for things. And so I went to take my check ride, and the examiner told me that I was the best prepared student he's ever seen throughout his entire career. And yet PUC was still trying to tell me I need 5-10 more hours, presumably to build funds, to build finances. And when those hours cost upwards of $250 at a time, that's significant. Anyway, that's my experience.
Thank you very